The craftsmen of Greece, meanwhile, produced a number of high-quality household goods that were highly sought after in Rome, and the rugged country was a source of high-quality tin and copper. But by far, Greece's most important contribution to the Roman economy was its export of educated slaves, who, in time, came to run practically the whole empire. Overtly conquered, the Greeks had a bit of revenge by covertly running in many ways the empire they supposedly served. West of Achaia, and for a long time simply a part of Macedonia, was the province of Epirus. Conquered along with the rest of Greece in the Macedonian Wars, and peeled off into its own province in 67 AD, this maritime territory was situated along the Ionian Sea across from the boot of Italy. Originally one of the Romans' first footholds in the east, remember that the Romans took possession of the coast in the mid-200s BC to prevent piracy, the culture and economy of Epirus was centered around its port towns servicing the trade lines from Italy to Greece proper, though it was also known for producing its own excellent cheese, wine, and oils. Northwest of Greece and due west of Moesia was the critical region known as Illyrium or Illyricum. First conquered by the Romans in the 160s BC, the region wasn't fully pacified until Octavian put the final stamp on things in the mid-30s BC. In the constitutional settlement of 27, Augustus claimed Illyricum as an imperial province and eventually stationed 4 legions there. Illyricum wound up being the backbone of the Roman Empire as it stood at the crossroads between east and west, north and south. It bordered both the Adriatic Sea and the Danube River, and depending on where you were coming from, it was the gateway to Italy, the gateway to Greece, the gateway to the Far East, while all the while acting as defender of the northern border. At some point during the reign of Tiberius, Illyricum was split into the more peaceful and mineral-rich Dalmatia in the south, which is now the Croatian coast, and the more rugged and militant Pannonia in the north. Pannonia would then be divided further by Trajan into Upper and Lower Pannonia to make the territory, like Moesia, more agile and responsive to attacks. Illyricum in general has been called the province that held the empire together, as its constantly under-arms population formed the bulk of the critical Danube legions and eventually produced the emperors that dragged Rome from the depths of the disastrous 3rd century, Claudius Gothicus, Aurelian, and then finally Diocletian. Neighboring Pannonia to the west, as Europe begins to climb up into the Alps, was the imperial province of Noricum, composing most of modern Austria. Granted independence by Julius Caesar for taking his side during the Civil War, the Noric people were left alone until they made a fateful decision to join in a Pannonian uprising in 16 BC that eventually, once put down, led to Noricum being called a province, even if it was not formally organized as such, until Claudius noted that they were still an off-the-books territory in 41 AD. For years, Noricum was ungarrisoned, but Antoninus moved a legion into the country in order to shore up the northern border, perhaps anticipating the storm that he saw coming down from Germania. Lacking high-quality soil, Noricum was a classic iron and blood province, providing both high-quality steel and high-quality soldiers for the legions. We wind up then finally, and, rather anticlimactically, in Raetia, an alpine province composed of modern west-central Switzerland. Conquered during the joint campaign of Tiberius and Drusus, Raetia was a classic example of the Romans making a desert and calling it a peace. Though it had no permanent legionary presence, Raetia still wound up a key part of the extended Limes Germanicus, holding down the eastern portion of the fortification network with a locally raised militia. Relatively depopulated, the native Raetians produced cheeses, pitch, honey, and a particular brand of wine that Augustus declared was his favorite in the whole empire. So there you have it. In making this circuit of the empire, I think the only thing I missed were the 3 tiny administrative districts in the Alps, organized in 14, 47, and 63 AD respectively, to protect communication lines and keep travel routes through the Alpine passes clear. By all means, though, if I miss something, please let me know. I should probably at this point knock out a nice concluding paragraph that artfully condenses the many faces and many places of the Roman Empire, but the tour has left me exhausted. Next week is question time. See you then. This week's episode is brought to you by Audible. As you now know, Audible is the internet's leading provider of audio entertainment with over 60,000 titles to choose from. When you're done with this episode, go to audiblepodcast.com/Rome. That again is audiblepodcast.com/Rome. By going to that address, you will qualify for a free book download when you sign up for a 14-day trial membership. There's no obligation to continue the service, and you can cancel anytime and keep the free book you downloaded. You can also keep going with one of the monthly subscription options and get great deals on all future audiobook purchases. This week, I'm going to make kind of a strange recommendation. Apparently, Audible is putting out these little 5-minute segments for kids on things like whales and dinosaurs and volcanoes. Well, they have one for the Roman Empire and one for Julius Caesar. If your kids are a great place to get them started. Just remember to go to audiblepodcast.com/Rome so that they know who sent you. Hello, and welcome to the History of Rome. Episode 90, the 100th episode. So here we are at a nice shiny milestone, cut and stamped, fittingly enough, during the age of Antoninus Pius, who cut and stamped so many milestones during his reign. I never thought when I started the show that I would ever get near 100 episodes, nor did I think for a minute I would still be doing this almost 3 years after I published the first episode on a random Sunday night in late July 2007. That first episode was just over 1,900 words and lasted 11 minutes and 48 seconds. After I got a few episodes of similar length under my belt, I did some loose math about how much progress I was making each week so I could figure out what kind of hole I had dug myself into. The results seemed crazy. To complete the whole course of the empire would take 225 to 250,000 words and wind up being 20 hours of recorded material spread out over maybe 75 episodes. In other words, I was committing myself to producing a gargantuan pile of words. I tried not to think about it and went back to researching the plebeian secession of 494 BC. Fast forward to today. 99 episodes in the can, working on the 100th as we speak. 329,186 words, and counting. The album I maintain in iTunes is now calculated in terms of days rather than hours, and we're not even to Marcus Aurelius yet. So, how long is the History of Rome going to take to complete? The answer? I have no idea. I don't make projections anymore. Last week's tour of the Empire was an absurd 6,400 words and lasted 43 minutes and 43 seconds. Who saw that coming? Certainly not me. It'll be done when it's done, and not a minute before. Of course, as you know, today we're going to continue to make no forward progress, and instead celebrate the occasion of the 100th episode by opening the floor up to questions. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to answer every question that came in, but there were definitely a couple of topics that seemed to be on more than one person's mind. I'll do my best to cover those, and then tuck in a few more I liked particularly, or that allowed me to talk about things I missed along the way. In cases where more than one person asked essentially the same question, I'm going to name the first person who posted, which seemed a fair and judicious way of doing things. So, without further ado, let's get started. Nemo, among many others, asked, who are the 5 best emperors, and who are the 5 worst? I initially had a sort of rambling explanation for how we ought to be judging these guys, and what terms like best and worst mean to me. But then I realized that if I went on like that, I'd only have time to answer like 3 questions. So, In the interest of maximizing the number of questions I'm going to be able to get to, I'm just going to cut to the chase. Number 1, Augustus, for obvious reasons. Number 2, Diocletian, for almost single-handedly reviving and rejuvenating a broken empire, even if it did all start to fall apart after he died. 3, Trajan, for his stabilizing hand, good-natured wisdom, and military skill. 4, Constantine, for, among other things, his lasting impact. I mean, Constantinople. 5, Hadrian, for his obsession with cementing the Roman Empire as a permanent institution guided by pragmatism rather than romantic notions of glory. I'm as surprised as you are that Marcus Aurelius is not on that list. He's probably number 6. Vespasian is probably number 7. After that, I'm not really sure. I think I'd plug Claudius in at 10. Aurelian was pretty awesome, even if he didn't rule for very long. Theodosius should probably be in there too, though I'll admit that at this point he's one of the major emperors I know the least about, having always focused on early Roman history rather than late Roman history. Which, for those of you who asked what my favorite period in Roman history is, it's pretty much everything between the exile of Tarquinius Superbus to the victory at Zama. I'm an early and high Republican era kind of guy. My 5 worst emperors, sort of not counting the guys whose reigns are measured in months and days, are, number 1, Commodus, for being a dangerously insane, immature hedonist. 2, Caligula, also for being a dangerously insane, immature hedonist. 3, Caracalla, for being a relatively sane, but still unquestionably bloodthirsty tyrant. 4, Nero, for being an immature hedonist, who was more concerned with performance than he was with governance. And 5, Elagabalus, for being such a damn weirdo that no one knew what to do with him until they finally decided it was best to just kill him, which was probably for the best. The one common theme I see running through this list is too much power at too young an age. Caligula, believe it or not, was the most seasoned member of this group, coming to power at the advanced age of 24. Not that there aren't worthy exceptions, but I think in general we should always remember that handing absolute power to a teenager is just a bad idea. A follow-up to this question was submitted by Monique. Given all the emperors and Roman leaders you've covered, who interests you the most and why? Continuing with the emperors first, I am now very fond of both Claudius and Domitian, because they were the 2 leaders who turned out to be the most different from my initial impressions of them. Claudius the dullard, and Domitian the tyrant. Both had their faults, but both were also far more complex and effective than I had given them credit for. Besides them, I will always have a soft spot in my heart for Marcus Furius Camillus, who was once a towering figure in Roman history, and has now basically been forgotten. Scipio Africanus, of course, that damned long hair who beat Hannibal, and finally, dear old Marcus Agrippa. We should all hope to have best friends as utterly kick-ass as Marcus Agrippa. Touching on a subject that popped up a few times, Lycanthrope asks, one of the earliest topics that was brought up is the purported similarities between ancient Rome and the U.S. What are the main similarities and differences between ancient Rome and the present and historical U.S.? Well, let's go through the obvious list. The United States kicked out a monarch in favor of a rich aristocracy that was self-consciously modeled on Roman institutions, dealt with violent upheavals as the lower social classes attempted to capture some power for themselves, expanded aggressively